Hello and welcome to the Satluj TV podcast. Now, regular viewers of our programme will know that we often talk about the British citizen Jagtar Singh Johal, detained arbitrarily in India for nearly 7 years. And of course, we also talk about the inexplicable inaction of successive British governments to free Jaggy, as he's known, despite the fact he still remains detained without any conviction of any crime. A clear violation of any normal democratic process of law. So I'm pleased, therefore, to speak today with Jaggy's brother, Gurpreet, who has campaigned tirelessly to both raise awareness of Jaggy's plight and to lobby successive governments to act to end this pretty shocking situation. Gurpreet is a practising solicitor himself, specialising in immigration law. He's also a Labour councillor and a fierce proponent against injustice. Gurpreet, welcome. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Angus. Thank you for having me on.
A pleasure. Now, Gurpreet, I'd like to start, if I may, just to give a little context of yourself, your brother and your family. Could you perhaps give us just a little background and your family's connection to the Punjab itself?
Yep, Angus, so my mother and father were both born in the Punjab, and that's where our connections come up. My father came to the UK while he was quite young, and then later he married my mum, who came to the UK. So that's where the connections come in terms of the Punjab. When we were younger, our holidays used to be always going to India, the summer holidays. That's where we would spend our holidays. And that's quite common within Sikhs and Indians itself, that you would spend your summer holidays in India as opposed to going abroad in other countries. In 2007, my mum passed away, but one of the parts of my mum was she wanted us to have a connection to India. So at the time, 2 years later, I got married and my wife was from India. And that was just to keep that connection so we can go back and forth and keep my mum's dream alive in that respect. Jagtar, we hadn't expected him that he would agree to also get married in India, but he agreed, and we went on a family holiday in April 2017. Jagtar, at that point, met who is now his wife, and they decided to get engaged at that point. And in October 2017, they decided to get married. So that's the connection that we have. That's where our roots are from, and that's where our ancestors are from. So we've always wanted to keep that connection.
So then, Gurpreet, what took you into law? Of course, that's quite a profession to go into. What was the attraction of law?
Again, it was when I was younger. One of my dad's friends had talked about debating for a living, and this was when I was 12, 13 years old, 16 years old, working in the restaurants with my dad. And I thought, oh, that sounds interesting, to go and debate for a living and just get paid for talking. So I did my college, went on to university. When I went to university again, it became one of those ones where my mum was so proud that her son's gone to university, he's going to be a lawyer. In my first year of university is when my mum actually passed away, but at that point my family said, look, fulfill your mum's dream and become the lawyer that your mum was so proud of. So that became an aspect of why I continued on with law. And then it was just, as aspirations, you want to fulfill your parents' dreams. And I ended up being, touch wood, good at what I do. And I've been practicing now as an immigration solicitor since 2014. So I've got my own company, so I must be doing something well that I'm able to open my own company as a result.
Indeed, and also I understand you are a Labour councillor, and that's quite a big step into public service. What drove you into politics?
I think that's where Jagtar comes in. All the campaigning and all the support that we've required from the UK government, which we hadn't got, and the support that I got from my own constituents that are now my constituents, so it resulted in I wanted to give back to the community that was giving back to me. So as a result, I put myself forward for the Scottish Parliament elections. Unfortunately, that wasn't for me. I didn't get accepted in there, but I then put forward for the local council elections and I was elected. So I've been Labour councillor now since May 2022, and I'm hoping that I'm doing the right things to give back to the community that's been given me. It's supported my family for so long.
Okay, Gurpreet, if I may, let's move on then to the story of your brother. And of course, there's a lot of information out in the public domain. It's very hard to sort of sift out what's real, what's true, and what isn't. So perhaps could you give us, certainly from your own words, what you understand actually happened from when he flew out to India for his marriage, and then what actually happened shortly after? Could you talk us through those details?
Yeah. So Angus, after the marriage, I came back. And Jagtar stayed on. There, he was due to come back to the UK on the 1st of November 2017, but he decided to spend time with his wife, get the visa application done, and spend a bit, as one would say, the honeymoon after the marriage. So he didn't come back on the 1st of November. My wife and my youngest son, my dad and my aunt came back. And on the 4th of November, I get a call from Jagtar's wife. It's about 10:30 in the morning in the UK. It's a Saturday. I've got up and all I'm hearing is a hysterical Jagtar's wife. Something's happened. They've taken him away. Automatically, I've got up and saying, what's going on? She's hysterical. My cousins then takes the phone and says, people have just came, stopped the car, taken him away. We don't know where he's gone. So I said, well, calm down. My aunt, who's from Jalandhar itself, and just to see what we can do. So automatically, I've got up, looked online to see what we can do, and I've looked at the Foreign Commonwealth Office at that time to say, because that's the first thing I could think of, just waking up. My thoughts initially were that we've just had a lavish wedding. It's potentially money that people want and he's British national. People are wanting money or extorting money off it. That was my initial thoughts of it. Various inquiries were made at police stations by my aunt and Jagtar's wife, and they were told that he was in Moga now in Bagheprana, which is in Punjab. So the family had went over there, and at that point there was nothing. They couldn't see him, they couldn't talk to him. But what the Indians wanted was Jagtar's passport at the time, and I'd told the family not to give the passport because we don't know what they wanted it for. We were told at that time to get a solicitor, so we managed to get a solicitor to appear at the court. At one time the police had said to the family, come to the court at this time, and on the other side in the morning they phoned and said, don't go to court, come to the police station and you'll be able to see him. So Jack for remand during this period for 5 days that was given. And during this period is when Jagtar has said that he was subject to torture, inhumane torture. I had flown out with my youngest brother on the Sunday morning because Jagtar's wife was hysterical, what's going on, what's happening. So we'd flown out just to see what we can do. We tried to make inquiries, spoke to the lawyer, nothing, couldn't find out where he was. On the 7th of November, we're in India, and there's a live broadcast by, at that time, the Chief Minister of Punjab, Captain Amrinder Singh. And that says that we've uncovered a plot, and we've arrested all these people in alleged murders that took place. And Jagtar's name was all over. The British national, he's confessed, he's done this. Straight away, my family panicked and said, you need to come back, because the situation in India is they arrest one male and then they arrest the rest of the male relatives. So we managed to get back to the campaign started as a result of that. The Indians had accused Jagtar of being involved in multiple murders. He was accused of financing the murders. That was it, where it started off. Initially, he was a financer. Our house in Punjab had been raided by Punjab police. During this period, my dad's paternal aunt had fallen ill, and then she passed away. NIA took over the cases and they raided the house again on her funeral to the extent, and they couldn't find anything. They were looking for bank statements as such, because allegedly they had all these records that Jagtar had financed these murders that took place. So the question that you've asked is, what is my understanding? My understanding of the Indians, they keep picking and choosing when they feel like it. Jagtar is one day a mastermind, one day he's a financer, the second time he's actually accused of being the perpetrating one of the murders. So it's one of those ones where the Indians have made various accusations and now framed charges in September 2022 that Jagtar has been involved with conspiracy to murder and causing terror within India. But to date, not 1 ounce of evidence has been produced against him. So he's been prolonged in various cases. He had initially 10 cases by Punjab police. One case remained with Punjab police, which is at Bagepurana Moga case. There's been over 135 trial hearings. Prior to this, there was pre-trial preliminary hearings, and not 1 ounce of evidence has been produced. At the most recent hearing just last week, the prosecution have finally said they have 5 further witnesses to cross-examine, and then that's the evidence produced. But to date, nothing's been produced against Jagtar. One of the other Punjab police cases had went the court, but the judge acquitted Jagtar and threw the case away and said that you can't charge someone that's already been charged on this because it's the same allegations. However, 8 of the cases which involved attempted murder and involved murder went to the NIA, which is the National Investigation Agency, which is the equivalent to MI5, MI6, or you can say the FBI in terms of it. At that time, the family were hopeful that they would do a proper job. There's no evidence and they'll let it go. But so Jagtar was tortured by Punjab police into signing a blank document, whereas the NIA are a bit more sophisticated than that. So they mentally torture you. When I say mentally torture you, they say to you that if we do not confess, or we'll take you away from Punjab to Delhi, and that's exactly what they did. So originally Jagtar was detained in Nabha jail in Punjab, but the Indians tried to take him to Delhi originally, but we succeeded in a challenge within the courts in Punjab. But then they went straight to the Supreme Court at that point, and they transferred Jagtar from Punjab to Tihar jail in May 2019. My position on the family aspect is...
Sorry, Gurpreet, I just want to jump in there. Was there any clue before Jagtar arrived in India that anything was going on, that there was any investigation? Because it does appear, basically, he was ambushed. They knew he was there, and essentially they ambushed him, and that's the last that anybody saw of him.
Yeah, so that's what's happened. So in terms of us travelling to India in April 2017 as a family, Jagtar was allowed in and out of the country. There was no issue. In October, before the wedding, 1st of October, when Jagtar travelled to India, he was allowed into the country and there was no issue at all. Due to leave the country on the 1st of November, but he decided to stay on. So my whole aspect of it is, if Jagtar is guilty of something, he has done something, you knew where the house was, why not knock the door and detain him as you would to take someone else? But the way he was taken was, your car is intercepted, plain-clothed officers, which we found out afterwards, are the ones that have put a hood over his head, bungled him into a van and just taken him away without identifying themselves. Now, I guess there's various things the Indians have claimed that they haven't tortured Jagtar and they haven't done things, but not once have the Indians said that we didn't intercept a car, we didn't hood him, and we didn't bungle him into a van and take him away to an unknown location. Now, this has been verified by the UN Working Group of Arbitrary Detention, because we made a submission to them that Jagtar has been arbitrarily detained, and the Indians had an opportunity to reply back to it. And following that, in April 2020, out, but it wasn't officially put out until May 2022 that Jagtar has been arbitrarily detained by the Indians. One, there was no legal basis for his arrest. Two, he's been detained due to writing about the Sikh human rights violations that took place. And three, that he should be released from detention because there's no legal basis for his case. Despite this, the Indians have continued on. Now, what's important here, Angus, is in May 2018, I took a campaign to Geneva outside the UN. On that day, the Indians produced a charge sheet and said, "Look, we're going to be charging Jagtar." This was the NIA. Straight away, Redress, who have been helping the family campaigning and had made the submissions to the UN working, so they had made it to the Special Rapporteur of Torture and Mistreatment. They had said any evidence undertaken under duress and torture is inadmissible. So that countered them. So the Indians had tried at that point to say there's evidence against Jagtar and we're going to be convicting him. That fell through. In May 2022, the UN Working Group of Arbitrary Detention said that Jagtar was arbitrarily detained. It wasn't until September 2022 that Jagtar was formally charged on the NIA cases, which is now November 2017 to September 2022. That's nearly 5 years it took for the Indians to actually charge Jagtar. Now, what the judge has said with the charge, our argument has been that you can't do double jeopardy because you've charged him in Bagheprana. The allegations against Jagtar are exactly the same in every single one of the cases. So how can you charge him again? Was that he hasn't been convicted and hasn't been any conclusion in that case. The Indians have showed a prima facie case, and as a result, I need to put these charges on. Now, the burden is very low for the prima facie case that the judge had. He totally agreed with the arguments made by the advocate representing Jagtar, which were that there is no evidence, there's nothing, but the Indians have claimed that they have two witnesses against Jagtar. Now, the evidence is redacted. That same evidence was looked at by the Supreme Court of India, and I watched the hearing, and they had said, at worst, Jagtar is a courier that had given £3,000. At worst. Where is the evidence to say that he was involved in this conspiracy? Now, I say those things because I'll come back to what the Indians have said within the paperwork, that Jagtar travelled to France in 2012 or 13. He gave £3,000 to an accused who suspiciously died in jail in April 2018. That £3,000 was used to commit terror and murders within India. Now, let's take it at the highest. Let's take it at the highest. Jagtar's given this money in 2013. The first murder didn't take place until 2015, and then it's 16 and 17. So that £3,000 has gone a long way, and it's meaning that it's really cheap to kill 6 or 7 people with £3,000. That's the Indians' claim. To say that Jagtar is a member of Khalistan Liberation Front, and that Khalistan Liberation Front is a proscribed group. And as a result, so these are the allegations against Jagtar. Now, let's break it down. And I'm grateful for you letting the audience know that I'm a solicitor. I'm taking it at the highest. I'm a brother on one side, but the legal skills that I've gained, I can't take away, and I do analyse that way. At the worst, if Jagtar has given £3,000, there's no evidence to say that was used for the murders. Secondly, Khalistan Liberation Front were not a prescribed group at the time of these offences. The Indians only prescribed the group after the charge sheet was issued, And that was only to make it this massive international conspiracy and terrorist law. So if you look at the facts of the case, they haven't produced anything. But if you look at the starting point, and I'll use this word as lawyers use, is the poisonous, the fruit of the poisonous tree. Whereas you've started off by torturing someone. So you've abducted someone, you've tortured them, you've made them sign blank documents, and now you're using this alleged evidence against them. And another aspect to this case was, because the popularity of the Free Jaggi Now campaign had increased, the UK government were talking about it. The minister at the time, Rory Stewart, had said if a British national has been subject to mistreatment and torture, extreme action will be taken. His post. And the Indians knew that the campaign had reached a level where around the world they were talking about Jagtar. At that point, they brought out this alleged confession video. This alleged confession video was given to pro-India media, who produced it everywhere. And in this alleged confession, there was nothing in it. But you may have seen, Angus, some of the way the pro-Indias play it. They dramatise the situation so much that you think that someone's done it, someone is guilty of the thing. But see, when you listen to the actual content of that, all he said was that he used to listen to hymns of Jagtar Singh Johal. He had some pictures of Bhai Sukha and Bhai Jinder. Many in their houses, that it's not a crime to listen to religious hymns, and it's not a crime to have those pictures. So that's all he has said, and that's what the Indians blew up. What comes to question is how did the media get that information? It obviously was leaked through the Punjab police or the NIA, but it's not even admissible. So as it stands, I apologise for taking a long time in respect of this. As it stands, no evidence has been produced. The cases are continuously delayed, and what has been questionable is that in September 2018, 5 non-Sikh activists and members who've helped the Free Jaggi Now campaign, their houses were raided. And when the houses were raided, they were looking for evidence against Jagtar. There was Punjab police people there. So it's quite a situation where the UK government had said, we don't know anything about this, but the Indian press media had said 5 houses had been raided, and they even gave the names of the individuals who had been raided. So it comes to a question, whereas what information is the UK sharing? Are the UK government under pressure from the Indians because they want this trade deal? And are they so hell-bent of sacrificing human rights over a trade deal? That's the question that comes off the government. Again, I say that with a pinch of salt because the new government were only elected in July this year. So we have seen David Lammy raise Jagtar's case on the first visit to India. So, and I think that's pretty high up on the agenda when the Foreign Secretary does it on the first visit. So I think that's where we're at. It has taken 6.5 years to push the UK government. They haven't been pushed. Instead, what we have been seeing is them restricting rights of Sikhs within the UK. Whether you've got the raids in September 2018, you have the West Midlands 3 extradition that the Indians had applied for, and the Home Secretary at the time, Priti Patel, signed it off. Now, that was a really crucial and scary moment, and I say that as a campaigner that's been campaigning for Jagtar, because those 3 individuals that had the houses raided in the middle of the morning, I woke up sometimes having nightmares thinking, that could have been my house. I've got young children, and what would happen to them if you've got CTU coming to your house at that point? So it becomes a scary aspect when foreign interference is to that actually force you to try and shut you up within your own country. So I think I've given quite a long bit. I'm sure you've got questions on the back of those.
Yeah, no, indeed. It's actually, no, I appreciate that, because there is a lot of detail there that fills in a lot of people's gaps, I'm sure, in their knowledge. And I would actually like to talk about the potential collusion. There is evidence of collusion between the British state and the Indian state. One thing I would like to just to go back on, and it's about motive. And I'm not talking, ironically, about Jagtar's motive. It's the Indian government's motive. What was Jagtar doing that led the Indian state to want to detain him? It's very clear that this whole legal case against him is full of holes. It's very questionable, and it appears that they have arbitrarily detained him for all these years for a reason. There must be a reason, despite the fact that in any let's say any normal court of law, he would have been freed many years ago, or at least faced a fair trial. So clearly they are playing a game here. The question is why? What is it about Jagtar that they fear?
So Angus, Jagtar was documenting and writing about Sikh atrocities that took place in 1984. When I talk about the atrocities, there was thousands of young men killed on attack on the Golden Temple, Harmandir Sahib in 1984. Now, Jagtar wasn't born at that time, but we've been brought up from young kids to know what happened in 1984, and innocent people were killed due to a government plot at that aspect. Now, there was pictures that Jagtar managed to collate through his research of mothers that hadn't seen their children. They didn't have their photographs, and some mothers still believe that their children are going to come back. But even 40 years on, they believe that they're going to come back. And Jagtar was able to trace those photographs, and some of them find out more about them and let people know who they were. Now, that website he'd done it under was Never Forget 84. Martyrs take place, and there's martyrs in various religions and various faiths. And our gurus are martyrs of the Sikh religion, their lives to save other faiths. Now, Jagtar was documenting in respect of the individuals who were killed. He was talking about the Sikh human rights violations that took place. That's his crime according to India, whereas that's not a crime to learn about your history. It's not a crime to know about your history. And genuinely, I'm proud of my brother, because there's some mothers now actually have a photograph of their son who was massacred, killed at the time, and they have their own memory of that individual, whereas that wasn't possible prior to them. Now, the Indian state look at that in a different way. They look at that it was a terrorist aspect. Now, I share this information in terms of it. Now, Janelle Singh Johal was, the BBC had done a documentary many years ago, I think it was 2015, him in a way. Now, my maternal grandfather is illiterate. At that point, he said, "What's going on here?" I explained what was said, and he said he wasn't. He saved the Sikh religion. If it wasn't for him, he was the one that stood his ground. And this is someone that's illiterate, that's came to this country many, many years ago, and he's telling us what the facts were, because he was there at the time. So that's where it comes to. That's when you hear about the stories of what sacrifices have given, and Jagtar was able to translate them from Punjabi to English. Now, why do the Indians need him? Because without Jagtar, there is no international conspiracy. The Indians want people to stop talking about what happened in 1984. The Indians don't want people to be talking about this, and they want to silence Sikh activists. But what has it done? It's actually went the opposite, because what India have done have made more younger people alive to the situation of what's going on. They've told, Jagtar's story tells young people now that these are the violations that happens to Sikhs if you're a minority within the country, and as a result there are no rights that you have. You could be accused and jailed for many, many years, and that there's evidence against that have committed crimes could be free within months or even years, whereas Sikhs could be sitting, like Jagtar's case, under trial for nearly 7 years. And there's, at the end of the day, when you look at it, it doesn't look as if there's light at the end of the tunnel. So what I would say is Jagtar is needed for this international conspiracy. Without it, it's not possible. The Indians want to silence activism within UK, the diaspora, Canada, America, and they have used Jagtar as a pawn within this. But what the Indians have failed is our family members. Like, you asked me about my connection to Punjab. My dad came to the UK, worked 2 jobs in Indian restaurants and shops in order to get the children a better life, get them an education. I became a lawyer. Now, the younger people here now are educated. They work in a different way. We've been able to expose what the lies that the Indians have been telling over the last 7 years and even longer. So I think that's the difference where the Indians had underestimated in terms of it. To the extent when I came back from India after Jagtar had been abducted and detained, the Indians had said that I was the mastermind behind everything, and that was just another way of trying to stop the campaign of going forward, to say that he's collecting money as a result, whereas the evidence was contrary, because I was saying to people, do not collect money, and if I need money, I will ask for it myself, as opposed to people collecting and it going or being misused. So I think in that respect, the Indians have tried to make it an international conspiracy. Without Jagtar, there is no conspiracy, and the case doesn't go anywhere, because the rest of the accused are all of Indian nationality, and Jagtar is the only one with foreign nationality.
Interesting. One thing that strikes me about all the context of this is, and I've already referred to it already, is this collusion between the British state and the Indian state. And, you know, that we are aware, and you've touched on it already, about the West Midlands Police, and certainly all the way back even to the 1980s and 1984, of course, the events of the Operation Blue Star. But of course, in recent years, those raids in the West Midlands, and again, during that time, there was clear evidence of some sort of collusion and collaboration between the NIA and West Midlands Police. But I only discovered just the other day, and this is a fact that quite shocked me, if it is true, that there is evidence that has emerged that prior to Jagtar's detention, is that evidence and information was passed to the Indian, let's call it the state for want of a better description, that the information was passed to India by our own security services, the domestic MI5 and the international MI6. Do you know anything about that? Is that true?
My apologies, Angus, you did ask me that question. In terms of it, there was a report that came in, it was an IPCO report, and at the time, Redress had been going through these reports, and various people had been questioned, and I was one of them, because there was 4 particular points within the IPCO report that mentioned that the Prime Minister has raised this case. Has potentially resulted in torture. The Prime Minister has raised the case. We have the permission from the individual, and we've been raising the case unilaterally. So 99.9% was all pointing to Jagtar, because Theresa May had raised Jagtar's case in April 2018 when Narendra Modi had come to London at the time, and the other points all did relate to Jagtar. So off the back of that, we have submitted a claim against the UK government. The UK government neither confirmed nor denied. So as Frank Gardner had said in his BBC report at the time, you can take it from there as you want to. So you're not confirming it's him, you're not denying it's him, so there's no middle ground in between. So we don't know what was shared, we don't know what evidence exactly was shared. That's an ongoing legal matter that's I'm pursuing, or that's within the courts as it stands just now. But I can say, but if you look at the IPCO report and you tied the 4 points to Jagtar, I've said this in no offence to blind people, but a blind person could see that it's most likely it's Jagtar, and given the government have neither confirmed nor denied, is another aspect of it. Now, one element I do want to say about the tort claim is, on one side, the UK government are saying that we're raising the allegations of torture that Jagtar's raised, and on the other side, they're questioning the torture. So it seems to be which one is correct. So we're still ongoing in that legal matter in terms of the allegations that it is Jagtar that it happened to. So it's a pretty big step, Angus, when you take the UK government to court on it. So that's where we're at the moment, but it's not progressed as far on it. But time will tell in respect of responses from the UK government in relation to that.
And another huge thing that I've often, in fact, ranted about in our shows when we talk about this, is this almost inexplicable level of inaction, results, whatever, from the British government. We are talking about a British citizen who has been allegedly tortured, who still remains in jail, for nearly 7 years. Can you just give us a quick snapshot of your, of course you have been lobbying successive prime ministers, or at least the Foreign Office, through the years since the detention started. How have you felt that the reaction has been from the government? Have you found that you're just being fobbed off? Are you just getting fairly anodyne, sterile answers and no results? What is your experience with the British machine, should we say?
I guess I would say, in fairness, it's the community, the Sikh community, as a result, that the UK government does anything. It's not the UK government. They have to be pressured, they have to be pushed in order to do anything at all. Now, when you've got the Special Rapporteur on Torture and Mistreatment saying there's evidence of torture, that's what's pushed the UK government to try and do something. But it has been a maze itself, where you would expect the UK government to look after you when you're born and bred within the country. You're actually not. You're challenging two governments. You're fighting against two governments in order. One, you're fighting the Indian government saying my brother is innocent. And two, you're challenging and campaigning for and lobbying the UK government to say he's a British citizen and you're not protecting him. You should be doing more than this and you're not doing that. Initially, we had to it took months before UK actually started raising the allegations of torture. It took months for the UK government to actually do anything on the arbitrary detention, because the arbitrary detention finding, I had received that in April 2022 prior to Boris Johnson going to India. And I had relayed that to them. The Indians knew about it because the state, so UK wouldn't have got a copy, but India got a copy prior to it being released, which resulted in Boris Johnson raising Jagtar's case at the time. So each opportunity that has taken has been as a result of campaigning and pushing the government to do more, as opposed to the government saying, he's a British citizen, we should be looking after his rights. It's not. It's been a pain in the backside when you've had the Assistant High Commissioner in Chandigarh coming to the UK and saying that Jagtar is fine, making comments to individual stakeholders about Jagtar is fine without the family's consent, without Jagtar's consent to discuss with wider people of Jagtar's case. Very quickly he was taken off the case. It took quite a while to get into speaking to the Foreign Secretary. So I've met with Jeremy Hunt, who was the Foreign Secretary. Thereafter I met James Cleverly. Now, hand on heart, I met James Cleverly, it was in January last year, and I'd walked out of that wanting to jump off London Bridge because it was so bad. He was not with it at all, and it felt as if all the hard work that we've been campaigning where we got to is just thrown back in our face, because James Cleverly was saying that we will do everything that's in the best interest of my brother. And I asked the question, surely it's in the best interest of my brother to be with his family in the UK and not for you to decide that he should be continuously in a jail. What's in the best interest? When I asked the question, are you disputing the UN Working Group of Arbitrary Detention's decision? He had no answer. I said, unless you're contesting, then the UK government have a policy. If you're arbitrarily detained, then you should be calling for the release, as they rightfully done so for Nazanin Zaghari Ratcliffe and Anushi Ashuri. I said you should be doing the exact same for Jagtar, but why not? So it's not been easy. The government have previously been saying that it's not trade, we're not putting trade on, we're doing this. Hand on heart, I would say that the government are favouring trade over human rights. And if they hadn't, and they had taken a stronger stance like Canada did September last year, when there was foreign interference, then Jagtar may have been home. Now, with that said, I am hopeful with this current government that they will bring Jagtar back home, and it just needs the political will and leadership to bring Jagtar back home, because it's certainly possible. David Cameron realised that, understood that when I met with David Cameron whilst he was the Foreign Secretary in February this year. At the time, which he fully understood that if the Indians won, they could send Jagtar back home tomorrow. Despite all of these cases, they could just conclude and return him, but it needs a political will from the UK government.
And it's interesting you use that term political will, because I myself have made no secret of my, I would even call them suspicions about the motivation of the British government, because again, I refer again to the lack of results. I mean, 7 years they've been supposedly at this. And if we look at the context of Great Britain working in the past with allies like the United States, we've invaded countries, sovereign nations, on the basis of human rights, imposing democracy and human rights. Yet here we have a very blatant, unambiguous case of a British citizen who's been tortured. And I do find it very interesting that you use the word political will, because I actually have come to the conclusion there is no political will to free him. The big question is why? Why on earth? And again, we've talked about collusion, which does imply by its very nature that there is some sort of relationship between the British state and the Indian state. It may go back historically, I don't know. But again, it always comes back to this political will. There does not seem to be a driving will. And further evidence of this, and we talk about the current government, who, as you say, came into power in July. David Lammy, prior to the election, as indeed Keir Starmer, both used the term arbitrary detention, relating, of course, to Jagtar's plight. Now, David Lammy, in an interview with the BBC, I think it was BBC Scotland actually, refused then, despite being pressed, refused to repeat that phrase, arbitrary detention. It's a very significant phrase with all the weight behind it, but he refused to repeat that. That, to me, implies that now they're in government, the British state have got them in their grip, that there is something behind the scenes that is dissolving this political will to free Jagtar. Do you get any sense of that?
I agree in terms of a change in respect of it, but Angus, in fairness, he raised Jagtar's case at the very first meeting when he's travelled to India, and he is fully aware of comments that he has made. Whilst I was disappointed in terms of him not agreeing on the BBC report about the arbitrary detention, I'm waiting for a meeting with him, which he's agreed to do so, to find out exactly what he did when he travelled and what he is doing. Now, whether he calls for Jagtar's release openly or whether he does that behind closed doors, that's something I'm waiting to hear from directly from David Lammy as to what he's done. And if not, then we take steps on how. There's two aspects here, which is that the UK government need to protect its citizens. And I've said this repeatedly. I've had to campaign hard, and I've been lucky enough to have the community behind me to support me throughout the last 7 years. But campaigning is hard work. It's not easy, and not everybody gets the support. Now, this could be you. This could be anyone's loved one that could be detained in any country, and when your own country do not protect you, it becomes problematic. the UK government hid behind dual nationality. And this is another aspect what people do is try and hide behind dual nationality. Whereas Jagtar's is clear cut. He's a British born and bred national. He was born in the Queen Mother's Hospital in Glasgow, and he is born and bred British here. And my father had a British nationality, which allowed us to have that nationality. It shouldn't be any different from anyone else. And we've seen where governments have the political will, they can do things when they want to. And it's hoped that this will be finally used here, because at the end of the day, the Indians use their political will within the court systems. And I'll give you an example here. Jagtar was granted bail by the High Court in one case of the NIA cases. The Indians took that to the Supreme Court. As I mentioned earlier, the judge looked at this alleged evidence against Jagtar and said, is that it? At worst, he was a courier that gave £3,000. It doesn't say he was involved in this conspiracy. Now, 7 in front of the Delhi High Court. And after a year, the judge has dismissed 5 on a technicality that they were lodged late, whereas Jagtar is being penalised in terms of potential defects in applications, because the Indian system is totally different. You file something and then the registrar pulls out all these defects against your applications, and you have to verify those. And the other 2 were refused on merit. On one, the High Court have said that there's reasonable evidence to say that Jagtar was not an innocent bystander. And 2, because of the charges against him, the allegations against him, they're quite serious and we can't grant bail. An individual, let's go one step back. One High Court granted bail, the Supreme Court upheld that decision, and this was 2 years ago. Now the High Court in Delhi, who had a judge that's sitting, listening to the whole aspect of it, saying that 5 should be dismissed because they were late, and 2 should be dismissed on merit as a result of the allegations against him. It's quite concerning that an individual has been in a prison for nearly 7 years. The Indians did not charge him formally until September 2022. When it came to the Indians producing evidence, to date, the Indians have produced 12 witnesses in 8 cases from September 2022 until September 2024. Now, each witness has to be cross-examined 8 times in different cases. And the Indians are alleging, because there's other co-accused, that there's about 195 to 250 witnesses. Now, it's taken 2 years to cross-examine or bring forward 12 witnesses that have provided no evidence against Jagtar in the last 2 years. Now, you can do your calculations yourself. You're looking at least 40 years of this case just being under trial. Despite this, the High Court refused bail due to the allegations and the charges against Jagtar, whereas the principle should be, or let's put it in an easier way, the NIA have an act which means that these kind of cases are supposed to take place on a day-to-day basis. Jagtar has a hearing every 8 weeks, and if the prosecution decide not to bring any witnesses, it gets adjourned for another 8 weeks. If the prosecution decide not to turn up, it gets adjourned for another 8 weeks. So, Punjab, he was able to have his cases ongoing and hearings, and hand on heart, his cases would have been finished. We would have had a conclusion if he hadn't been moved to Delhi. Now, the Indians look at this, we look at it and say, if they had the evidence, they would have charged him, convicted him, and hung him. Whereas the Indians look at it as keeping him in jail for 7 years, and even if he's acquitted after 14 years, we've given him the sentence. What are you going to do? We've ruined 40 years of an individual's life, and that's it. You're not going to get that back. Will be found to be acquitted. The biggest key factor is, and you can do a fact check yourself, under the UAPA cases, there's less than a 1% conviction rate. And even those that are convicted end up appealing on appeal and succeeding. But during that whole process, your life has been wasted. And that's all the Indians are doing here, is they're prolonging matters. And this is the biggest aspect that I'm trying to get through to the UK government, is that they're not bothered about Jagtar being guilty. They just want to prolong his detention for as long as possible. They want to show to the diaspora that you cannot talk about violations against Sikhs that have taken place, because this is an example that we will make of you. Now, you've seen cases in terms of the raids that took place in September 2018. You've got the West Midlands 3 case, and more recently you've heard about the Sikh Youth UK case. Now, if we draw parallels to the case itself, a non-registered charity under a charity commission has been convicted in a court which had various CTU, and I know you did an interview the other week in respect of it, and whereas you've contrast of another charity case where it has just been a charity commission and that's it and nothing else. So I think there's an element of foreign interference. I don't think that foreign interference is gone, and the UK government really need to stand up to it. And the Five Eyes, the Canada has stood up, USA have stood up, the UK haven't, Australia are also looking at it, so it needs to be an aspect of it. Foreign interference cannot take place. And I'll leave it with another example, Angus. We had an adjournment debate within the UK Parliament. So there's a briefing that goes out to members that are going to speak in respect of Jagtar. The Indian produced their own briefing to give to pro-India MPs, and it was full of inaccuracies in terms of that the Indians had blamed the defence of delaying matters, and as a result, that's why there's these delays. Otherwise, the cases would have been finished by now. Now, the Foreign Commonwealth Office have been attending Jagtar's hearings due to the pressure that we've put on through the campaign. So they do attend, they do try and every 6 to 8 weeks if they're granted permission by the Indian authorities. And the UK government had to write to the Indian High Commissioner to say that you cannot provide false information to individuals, because it wasn't the delays of the defence. The defence have turned up, it was the delays of the prosecution. Now, if you're going to have a fair trial, surely you need to have all this evidence that the Indians seem to rely on. But at one point, the Indians had said that this will take a long time and a lot of resource, so we can't provide those copies to the defence. At which point the judge said, well, you're relying on this evidence, it's your budget, you should be doing what has to be done. So if you look, I've given quite a lot of information. The bottom line, I would say, that would come, the plumbative line from my side would be, Jagtar has been detained for nearly 7 years. He's implicated in 9 cases, 8 NIA cases, 1 Punjab police case. He was implicated in another case that Jagtar was alleged to have been involved in whilst being in the highest security jail. But to date, no evidence has been produced against him. To date, the Indians have only prolonged matters, whereas any individual listening to you would be saying, if they would have convicted him and hung him and made an example of him by now, but they're still on this fishing expedition where they're still looking to try and get evidence against Jagtar nearly 7 years on, and to date they haven't found any evidence. They're not going to find evidence because there is no evidence against an individual. Now, for someone like ourselves to listen to that, and this is a democratic country, it becomes a bit challenging, because you think that there would be a system in place, but unfortunately there isn't a system. There isn't even the judges could reprimand the prosecution for failing to comply or push the case forward.
Interesting. Sadly, there we must leave it, but we do hope one day soon we will be reporting a much more positive story about Jagtar's release. Fingers crossed. Gurpreet, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Angus.
And thank you for watching the Satluj TV podcast. We will see you next time.